Switch, isn't it? Switch.
Well, welcome everybody. My name is Danielle. My pronouns are she, her. There's very few people here today, but it's actually kind of a nice way to get to know each other, sitting around tables. There's a few people joining us online. So if you haven't been to IGB before, we're an inclusive and affirming church that's all about learning together. And, we always talk about ourselves being on this journey toward radical inclusion and what it means to understand that God loves and welcomes everybody. And so I like to say on the journey because there's always things that we can do better at than that. So just invite you to kind of come be yourself today, and in the conversations that we have, there's no right or wrong answer. It's a time to explore different moments and thoughts from one another. So I'm going to hand over in a moment to Faith, who's leading us today. But first, Mark's going to lead us in a song. This is we call this our real talk gathering. So some of our gatherings are a little bit more set up church style, and then some are more oriented around conversation, and that's what this one is doing. So Mark's going to lead us in a song, and then over to Faith.
This song's called Every Praise, and if you catch the words and you want to sing along, I think that's okay.
So I'm here if you
Yes. Thanks, Mark. So to begin, we have what we call our question for sharing. This is a good chance to just get to know everyone and have a bit of chance to talk. So our question today is, have you ever had to wait a really long time for something you really wanted, and then did you get it, and whether or not you got it was what happened, what you expected? And so I guess I'll go. When I was really little, like 5 and 6, I really wanted Voltron. I don't know if any of you saw that cartoon, but it's like Voltron. There were these toys, and there were like 5 lions, and you put them together, and they made like this big like mecha thing with a sword. And I really wanted Voltron. Never got it as a kid. And then I know. But after I was married, like they released this like 25th anniversary special Voltron thing, and my husband at the time got it for me. So after 25 years, I got my Voltron. And it was pretty sweet. And of course, our dog chewed one of the legs of one of the Voltron, which is entirely appropriate, because when you have that toy when you're 5, your dog chews its legs, or your cousin breaks it or whatever. So that was entirely, I think, within the Voltron experience. So it was cool. But I'm not sure that it had the same effect as if I had gotten it when I was 5, but getting it 25 years later was pretty cool. So if you all want to have just a few minutes and chat about your own things, and then if you want, at the end of a few minutes, if someone wants to like feedback, like what all you shared, that'd be cool. Online. Folks online can put it in the chat, and we'll have someone checking that also. All right. So, sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but does anyone from any of the tables want to come up and share anything about what you've been talking about waiting for things and expectations? Anyone? Yeah.
I was just saying I'm not sure how to make this spiritual, but I waited a really long time to pass my driving test. I took 6 driving tests and 2 theory tests before that as well, and overall it took like a good few years to get my driving test and my driving license. And I honestly thought at various points that I wasn't going to get it at all, and it made, when I did get it, in answer to the question on there, it made an enormous difference to our lives, because I had a child at the time, and we'd been travelling everywhere on the bus, and all that kind of stuff. So it really did. It was massive delayed gratification, which I'm not normally very good at, and and it was very much worth the wait. Although it didn't have to take as long as it took. That's my story.
Thanks, Peggy. Anyone else? Anyone else want to share?
We were talking about weekends, holidays, when you're working for the week, waiting motivation for the weekend, and then life's not quite what you expect, or your holidays are quite impressive, but it's absolutely it. Yeah.
Yeah, for anyone who couldn't hear that at home, Rosie was saying about like waiting for weekends and holidays, and then waiting throughout the week, and then just maybe not being quite what you expected or hoped for. Do you have anything online?
I didn't say anything.
Okay, cool.
I could probably share one of them.
Yeah.
Personally, but I'm a little bit of an oversharer. So I have a 10-year gap between my children, and so we tried for about 8 years to get pregnant, the second one, and kind of gave up, and I will cry, did all that, and then, got pregnant, and so it was a lot older of a pregnant lady than I would have probably wanted to be, and, complicated emotions around having a kid a bit later, and obviously she's a great gift and a joy, but it probably wasn't what I would have expected my emotions to be. Like, they're a lot more complicated than perhaps I would have. It wasn't pure joy, it was like, ooh, complicated. So there you go.
I think those are some good examples of things that are, maybe have complicated feelings and aren't really passive waiting. They involve some work and things. So thank you. And I think Pete's going to read a scripture and a poem for us.
I'm going to read from Psalm chapter 130, which is on the piece of paper on the table, and for those who want to follow. And it says, Psalm 130, from the depth of despair, O God, I call for your help. Hear my cry, O God. Pay attention to my prayer. God, you kept a record of our sins. Who, O God, could ever survive? But you offer forgiveness, that we might learn to fear you. I'm counting on God. Yes, I'm counting on God. I put my hope in God's word. I long for God. More than centuries long for the dawn. Yes, more than centuries long for the dawn. O Israel, hope in God. And with God there is unfailing love. God's redemption overflows. God himself will redeem Israel from every kind of sin. Psalm 130. And when I came in and saw the little sheet in there, I was just flicking through, it prompted me to remind me of a poem that I was given 27 years ago, and I don't look that old. But this is called Wait, and I found it, I managed to just Google it online by Russell Kelfer. And it's given me, before I went to Bible college, and it actually kind of really helped speak to me. It's called Wait, and I'll read this. Desperately, helplessly, longingly, I cried. Quietly, patiently, lovingly, God replied. I pled and I wept for a clue to my fate, and the Master so gently said, Child, you must wait. Wait? You say wait? My indignant reply. Lord, I need answers. I need to know why. Is your hand shortened, or have you not heard? By faith I have asked, and I'm claiming your word. My future and all to which I can relate hangs in the balance, and you tell me wait. I'm needing a yes, a go-ahead sign, or even a no to which I can resign. And Lord, you promised that if we believe, we need but to ask, and we shall receive. And Lord, I've been asking, and this is my cry. I'm weary of asking, I need a reply. Then quietly, softly, I learned my fate. As my Master replied once again, you must wait. So I slumped in my chair, defeated and taught, and grumbled to God, so I'm waiting, for what? He seemed then to kneel, and his eyes wept with mine. And he tenderly said, I could give you a sign. I could shake the heavens and darken the sun. I could raise the dead, cause the mountains to run. All you seek, I could give, and pleased you would be. You would have what you want, but you wouldn't know me. You'd not know the depth of my love for each saint. You'd not know the power that I give to the faint. You'd not learn to see through clouds of despair. You'd not learn to trust by just knowing I'm there. You'd not know the joy of resting in me when darkness and silence were all you could see. You'd never experience that fullness of love as the peace of my spirit descends like a dove. You'd know that I give and I save for a start, but you'd not know the depth of the beat of my heart. The glow of my comfort late into the night, the faith that I give when you walk without sight, the depth that's beyond getting just what you asked, of an infinite God who makes what you have last. You would know that you'd never know, should your pain quickly flee, what it means that my grace is sufficient for thee. Yes, your dreams for that loved one overnight would come true, but oh, the loss if I lost what I'm doing in you. So be silent, my child, and in time you will see that the greatest of gifts is to get to know me. And though my answers seem terribly late, my most precious answer is still wait.
Thanks, Pete. I love that poem, and it's actually a little bit eerie how well it lines up for what we're talking about today. So Yeah, we're talking about waiting on God, and this is related to, I just finished walking a pilgrimage called the Camino de Santiago. Does anyone know what that is? Has anyone here heard of that? Okay. Yeah, so a few people know what it is, or have at least heard of it. So it's a walking pilgrimage to a city in Spain called Santiago de Compostela, where the bones of Saint James or Santiago are laid to rest. And for over 1,000 years, this has been a pilgrimage way. People have walked this, and there are different routes. So a lot of times, if you hear people talking about the Way of St. James, they're talking about one particular route, which is called the Française, which begins in France and goes down through France to Santiago de Compostela. Now, if you walk this particular route, if you read the guidebooks and get advice about it, as it turns out, a lot of that advice is geared toward if you're walking this one particular route. And it's things like, you're gonna find everyone along the way speaks English, you're never gonna be alone, it's very well populated, the path is very well marked all along, it's impossible to get lost. I've heard from others this is largely true, if you're walking the Française. I did not walk the Française. I walked a less common route called the Ingles. And part of this was for time. The Française takes 4 to 6 weeks to walk. It's over 700 kilometers. The Ingles, it's also considered a full pilgrimage route, but it's 114 kilometers. It begins north of the city, and according to the guidebooks, you can walk this in 5 to 6 days. So it took me 9 days. And it was walking through very rural areas of an area of Spain called Galician, where they do not speak Castellan Spanish, they speak Galician for the most part, although most people there know Castellan Spanish. Very few people know English. That was a challenge because I'd taken Spanish in high school, but didn't hold up as well as I'd hoped. There were not a lot of English speakers along the route. It was a lot more rural. The path was not as well marked as the Française. It was not consistent. I got lost. Thankfully, I had an app on my phone. When I realized I got lost, I was able to get back on track. But and I also did this alone, not as part of a group. So it was a little bit scary. And at the same time, though, I found myself trusting God a lot. Some other things to know about me are, everyone told me Spain is hot, and I generally like warm weather. To give you a sense of that, for me, I've kind of worked out the Celsius Fahrenheit conversion. So I start getting comfortable around, when it gets to about 22 degrees Celsius, I feel like I can take my jacket off. So you see, I've got my jacket on, between 23 and 27 is kind of like my golden temperature range. And it's I feel oh, this is good summer weather. I can be in short sleeves and t-shirt and sandals. So when people told me Spain was hot, I thought they meant that kind of a temperature range. As it turns out, Spain is having a bit of a heat wave. You might have seen on the news. So it was more like 35, which I was walking with a full backpack every day. And so that was not quite what I was expecting. So I found myself in this environment where people did not speak my language. It was much more rural than I expected. There were times when I was alone. There were no grocery stores. And I was walking to the end of the day to what's called an albergue, which is a hostel that's only for pilgrims. You can't pre-book them. You just show up and hopefully they have a bed. And there are other places you can pre-book that are a little bit more expensive, and I did do that a couple of times. But I really found myself waiting on God, and I'd never had that experience of just walking to a place without having a booking in place yet and not knowing if there was going to be a bed for me. And so that was really different. The other thing is, I'm used to being very fast, in terms of everything. I've done a lot of education, I walk fast, and I found, as I was walking with other people and I found other people, I was the slowest person. I walked the shortest amount each day, and I was slow, and people were impatient with how slow that I was. And I had never had that experience before. And it was that was a real eye-opener to me, to be the slow one, the one who's behind. And also not speaking the language. You get talked to like you're slow, which I was, because I didn't speak the language. And so there were just so many opportunities there for me to really have to trust in God and trust in Providence. And so I just want to talk about just a couple of experiences that I had that I really felt I was trusting on God. I'd met a group of five other folks from different countries who, at one point, the six of us were walking together, and it was great. And then we walked together for one day, and the next day, two people decided they wanted to walk a longer stage. They wanted to walk about 25 kilometers in a day. And the other four of us were like, we don't want to walk that far, so we walked a shorter route, and four of us stayed together. We stayed together for a day or so. And then three of us had said we were all going to walk together to this place that was mid-stage. So it was like, instead of walking another 20 kilometers, it was about 12 kilometers. And I waited. I very patiently waited for the rest of them to get ready from the hostel. They were all late. We were supposed to be out of the hostel by 8 a.m. They would take a really long time. But I waited for all of them very patiently when I would have liked to get on the road because it was getting very hot. And so then we all had our coffee and started going. And then one person went off to go a different route. And then one of the two other guys I was with said, well, I'm going to walk ahead the longer route to Hospital de Bruma. So most people would walk that far that day, but I didn't want to. And so then I was like, okay, so I was with this one other person. He looks at his phone and says, oh, there's a heat wave coming. I don't want to get caught in it. It's going to be over the next couple days. It's going to get even hotter. He's like, I'm going to start walking very quickly to get to Hospital de Bruma. And I was all alone. And I walked to this place. It was in the middle of nowhere, just this little hostel. And I had to wait until 1 p.m. for the woman to answer her phone to let me know the code to get into the hostel. And she would not answer her phone until 1 p.m., which I found out because the only other thing in this town was a restaurant. And I went to the restaurant, they told me you have to wait till 1 p.m. for her to answer her phone. So I'm like, it's really hot. So I was waiting at the restaurant. She finally answers her phone, lets me know how to get into the hostel. I'm all alone. I'm the only one there. It's really hot. It's the middle of nowhere. There's no grocery store. And I was like, well, I'll go to dinner at the restaurant. I'll meet people. I won't be so alone. I went to the restaurant. I was the only one at the restaurant. It was literally me and the woman who was serving, and she was on the phone and had no interest in me. And so I eventually got some food, and she didn't speak English, so I eventually got served something, and it was edible, so it was fine. But I remember walking back to this hostel and being like, I have to spend the night here. There is nothing for the next 11 kilometers except expanse and me and the heat. And so I was afraid and alone. And so I found myself going to the church that was immediately adjacent to the hostel I was staying in. I was praying. I was like, God, I don't know how to do this. I'm like, this isn't what I was expecting. I'm really scared. And as I was walking around the hostel, or not the church, I saw leaning up against the church just this stick. And a lot of people, as they're walking, will have a walking stick, and I had just never gotten one. And so I looked at it, it's just this thin bamboo stick. And I'm pretty short, I'm small, and I have really small hands. And the stick looked like it fit me. And I figured it could just be like a symbolic thing, so I took it with me. And I was praying, and I was like so afraid. I was like, I'm all alone in this hostel. The door was locked, and then I'm like lying down trying to sleep. And then after 11 p.m., like I hear like this jostling at the door, and someone coming in and being like, thank you. And I see a flashlight, and I was like, hola? And this person was like, hola? And I was like, habla inglés? And they were like, yes. And it turned out there was a woman who had been walking all day, like, and this was 11 p.m. She had had a much longer day than me. And she had walked to the bar, or the restaurant, and she was gonna ask them to get a cab for her to get to the next town so she could get a hotel. But instead, they opened up the hostel for her. And because the woman who ran the restaurant had a key. And so we were each the only other American that we had met on the route, because there were like no Americans walking on the Inglés. And so she's like, oh my God, it's so good to meet you. And we had this whole thing of connection. And if I hadn't been there, I wouldn't have been able to help her, because she didn't know like how these hostels worked, because they were very, very kind of low key. You had bunks, and every bunk has like this plastic wrapped package that has a paper sheet and pillowcase pillowcase covering it. So she gets in at 11, whatever at night, she's like, what's this plastic thing on the bed? And I had to explain to her that's, lay it down over the bed, and I showed her the hostel, and we just connected, and it turns out she's also in England right now. She's visiting her sisters here, she's in London, and she sent me a message, and so I just had all these kind of experiences that were just about just waiting on God and having the trust, that the right people are going to show up at the right time. The people who knew Spanish and English who could help me when I really needed help. And just really being in that situation of waiting on God was a really, I find that I'm so privileged, really. And it's like, usually I can live in this illusion that I can just make things happen on my own. And to be in an environment where it wasn't like that, it was just really eye-opening and, really changed my relationship with God in, I think, really good ways. And, yeah. So, that's that's most of what I have to say, but just to say that, oh, I forgot the thing about the walking stick, the other thing with it. The next morning when I was out with the walking stick, it was hot by 8 a.m. And there's this very steep section coming out of where I was walking, and so I used this walking stick, and it was literally like someone had taken my measurements and cut this stick for me, and I used it to climb my way out of this section. And that was my stick for the rest of my trip, and it was perfect, and it was a gift from God, and it couldn't have come without that waiting and trusting. So that's me. So I think, Mark, I think you're going to be playing another song for us. Is that right? Yeah, that's next. And these songs that we're singing, these are songs I found myself singing when I was walking, like mostly on my own. So that's why I chose these ones. As I was like waiting on God, this is what I was singing. Thanks, Mark. Now, we're just gonna have some more time of discussion around tables, and this is just for, like, the talk today, or the songs, or anything, the questions. If that just sparked anything for any of you, this is a good chance to, like, just have a conversation with some folks. Like, what have your experiences of waiting? What have those been like? And, you know, what if they've had to do with God or your understanding of the spiritual, or however you see that? So if you just want to chat in small groups, and then if you want to, like, if someone wants to feedback at the end, you're welcome. And yeah, so just have a chat and get some, feel free to get more snacks and drinks and all that. All right, so if we feel like we're done with our conversations, or if you want to wrap up a little, we were talking at our table, some of our conversations were around, like, the process of waiting, and how often it's the case that you want to be done with something, and you want to have a finished story, like, oh, I waited for this thing, and then, you know, now I'm done. But so many things, a lot of us were talking about the things we have in our lives that are still in process, and we're still waiting for, or when they showed up, there ended up being all these other layers to them. So it's like there's this complication with waiting, and it's like sometimes we're never done waiting, and it's like, and there's also this idea of active versus passive waiting. It's like you can be waiting for something, but you're doing a lot of things in the meantime. It's not like you're just sitting around like do. You can be doing things, but it's like until certain pieces fall into place, you can't force anything. So there's this idea of, you know, active and expectant waiting. And then we talked about something called waiting mode, which is like if you have something that's going to happen at the end of the day at like 4 o'clock, it's like you can't, like, for some people have a challenge of like doing anything before that time, because they're like, well, I have this thing that's going to happen at 4, and it's like, it's 1 o'clock now, but I can't do anything for the next 3 hours because I'm just thinking about this thing that's coming later. And how, like, when you're waiting for like a specific thing, it can kind of put you in like a state of like paralysis. So does anyone want to share anything from their conversations at their tables? Oh, yeah.
Well, just add something to what you were saying about how often faith spaces are places where you share the story after it's done, like the happy ending, and how important it is to share stories when they're in process, because that's what most of our stories are, in process. And I know there was a lot of guilt and stuff associated with that, like thinking like, you know, even things that have happened in my life where, you know, I veered off the path of like, oh, I've messed up, I've broken my story that had a really neat ending, now it doesn't have an ending anymore. So yeah, I think it makes me think, reminds me of why it's important to share those stories in process that aren't just all neat.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I was talking about how I had to live at home for quite a few years after I stopped uni, and that was really kind of a difficult thing for me to kind of get my head around initially, because it wasn't something I was kind of expecting to have to do because I had to do it for quite a few years and have to save up and get my own place. And now sometimes I find myself, even though I've got my own place, I should be really thankful, and sometimes I get annoyed with myself and I'm not being thankful about it. Like if I'm annoyed that, oh, I've got all this housework to do, and oh, my cat's done this or whatever, and I'm like, gotta sort it out, and I'm like, oh, I miss being home, and I'm like, no, actually, no, I don't. I have to kind of remind myself of why it's a gift, and I feel that that's kind of an important thing when you're finished waiting for that particular thing.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think that's a really, really good point you made, especially for those of us who come from church backgrounds where testimonies are a big thing. And there can be a pressure to have like a complete testimony that fits in a box, and to have more spaces for more complicated stories, I think is so important. So yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, does anyone else have anything that came up at their tables that they wanted to share? Yeah, just so much about just waiting and wanting things to be neat when they're not. It's like God is complicated or something. Yeah. So anyway, Pat, would you like to share a poem?
So this poem is called For Those Who Have Far to Travel. If you could see the journey whole, you might never undertake it, might never dare the first step that propels you from the place you have known towards the place you know not. Call it one of the mercies of the road, that we see it only by stages, as it opens before us, as it comes into our keeping, step by single step. There is nothing for it but to go, and by our going, take the vows the pilgrim takes. To be faithful to the next step, to rely on more than the map, to heed the signposts of intuition and dream, to follow the star that only you will recognize, to keep an open eye for the wonders that attend the path, to press on beyond distractions, beyond fatigue, beyond what would tempt you from the way. There are vows that only you will know, the secret promises for your particular path, and the new ones you will need to make when the road is revealed by turns you could not have foreseen. Keep them, break them, make them again. Each promise becomes part of the path. Each choice creates the road that will take you to the place where at last you will kneel to offer the gift most needed, the gift that only you can give, before turning to go home by another way.
Thanks. Now I'd like to share the blessing that we share every week. May we live fully, love wastefully, and have the courage to be all that God has created us to be. Thanks for coming.
Just a quick word of announcement before we completely head off. Nobody feel like you have to rush off. You can still chat and have more snacks, and then you'll see we'll gradually all start putting things away. Feel free to join in. It's that kind of environment. Next week we have a special event going on here in the garden outside. We're going to do, it's like, we're calling it a summer party. That's basically because if it rains, we'll do it in here. But if it's nice, we'll be outside. Bring and share a picnic. We'll have some cake and some drinks and stuff. But we're having some music. So my husband Joel, if you've seen him around, he's usually got some weird hair color. He's got his rap album is coming out, one of his new albums. So he's going to be doing some songs from that. And also David Benjamin Blower, if you've heard of him, he's a musician and does Nomad podcast. He's going to be coming and playing some songs. And we're going to have Adam lead us a little sing-along. And if anybody else has said, if you have a magic trick or a joke or a poem or anything you want to share, just give me a shout, and we're gonna go with that and see what we come up with. So you're really, really welcome. And it'd be nice just to relax time to hang out hopefully tonight. So enjoy the rest of your afternoon and your chats, and yeah.